Welcome everyone to our workshop today on new features in NITRO Studio released over the past year or so. Today we're going to take a look at things, things that were released in NITRO Studio over the course of the year. Thank you for joining today. I'm just going to give another minute or two for folks to trickle in. Looks like there's a few more popping on. Looks like we've got a couple coming in now. We'll just give them a minute to kind of get started and get connected to the audio. I'm not yet sharing my screen, so you should still see the kind of standard NITRO Studio workshop recap thing. So I will be showing my screen shortly, and then we'll be able to get going and I'll show you some of the features. So yeah, just giving a couple minutes there for folks to pop on. Looks like there's a few more coming in. Maybe today was a busy day. Everyone's just showing up last minute, and that's okay. All right, good. Okay, all right, we got some people on. All right, excellent. I think we'll go ahead and get started, and then of course this recording will be available on our website afterwards if you ever need to refer back to it. And as usual, so you can always on demand, you can watch it anytime. Again, my name is James Restivo from Crocaina Software. A lot of you I see on here have been to a lot of these workshops already. I'm glad you're coming back. So it shows, I guess you're getting some good value out of it. So that's great. So I will go ahead and start sharing my screen because what we're going to cover today is the new features released in 2021 in NITRO Studio. And before I do that, I do want to point out that there is a questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. If you have a question at any point in time, if you want to raise your hand and you have a question, pop it in there, raise your hand, or we'll get to you and let you ask your question. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. And okay, good. Should be showing the new features released in 2021. All right, so at a high level, here are some of the key things that we've put out in this past year. So going back to January, there's a whole bunch we've released, but I'm going to highlight the biggest features. I'm not going to go chronological order because that would be boring. There's a lot of like little stuff we released over the years. I'm sure you've seen little dribs and drabs of this, that, and the other thing coming out. But really, I'm going to focus on the high level, high impact stuff that's going to help you guys get your business processes implemented on a day-to-day basis. And I think the biggest one you see right at the top of the list here is new workflow designer and workflows and custom actions. Now, you may recall I did a workshop on custom actions earlier this year, showing that designer workflow, and we have recently released that for the NITRO Workflows as well. And right now it's released for the Office 365 customers, and we are working on a package to have that released for the on-premises customers. I believe that's correct. We may have already released it, but if it's not there for on-premises customers, it will be there before the end of the year, I believe. But online customers will have it. And it's going to look a lot similar to what you see with the custom actions designer. And we'll pop in and take a look at that a little bit later in this workshop. We also released a couple new actions in workflows and custom actions. And one that we haven't highlighted yet is this Parse CSV action. And I'll show you what that looks like. If you are using our Excel to SharePoint import tool, if you've ever used that, this is sort of a replacement of that, or a way to use the multi-factor authentication option, or there's a number of use cases for the Parse CSV. It's going to do something similar to our Excel to SharePoint tool, where you're taking an Excel, now a CSV file, and mapping the data into SharePoint. I'll walk through that one in brief as we go through this. Another one we did a workshop on earlier this year was the sending of an SMS text message, where you can connect to a Twilio account and you can send messages to mobile phones. And we also have the capability to intake messages from mobile phones to create SharePoint items out of them. So I'll walk through that in a little bit. We also had a workshop earlier this year talking about UI improvements for the buttons on NITRO forms. So there's a lot of theming options we added to the buttons, make them look a little nicer, make them look a little more modern, get away from the standard SharePoint buttons, at least on the classic forms. So we got those replaced now with buttons that look a little nicer. I'll show you some of the options of that. We also released a new app called ID Column, and that new app is a way for you to have a customized pattern for an ID column. It doesn't replace the SharePoint ID. That SharePoint ID stays there. You can actually use the SharePoint ID as part of the ID column to build it out as a variable within that structure. but it's a standalone thing that allows you to kind of, you can do like PR, for purchase requests, like PR-2021- NOV or DEC for December, or whatever it is. So we have those options there for that. And then there's a few other improvements, which I'll just kind of highlight towards the end of the workshop, talking about some new functions we've released, and we got that SMS text item creation I mentioned, and a few other things that we can go over. But let's focus in on the top one here, this new workflow designer, workflows and custom actions. Always worth revisiting, I think, because it is such a really cool thing, and we're going to be adding more to it as we go through 2022. So we have on our roadmap adding in other features to this workflow designer. So just take a quick snapshot of it. This is what it looks like. It's a workflow designer. So it's BPMN, business process management notation. It's really cool. It's got these gateways where you can decide which way to go. Where do I branch to? Do I go to query this list over here because of the type of request that's coming in, or do I query this list over here? And then what do I do with that information? Then you can add in an approver task if the approver is blank, or not blank, and then if it is blank, you can just end the process. That's very simple workflow, but you can see how it's going through the machinations in the process. And so that's a really great way to visualize what's happening with your business processes. So I'll pop over to you can see there's the same one here, and it's got the, I think I've mentioned this in almost every workshop, but I think it's just such a cool feature. You can drag and drop things around. You have all your actions over here on the left-hand side, where you can drag and drop things for sending emails, for instance. We had this approver task. Well, we want to send that person an email, so let's pop in and send mail action. So you can see you can kind of move things around. Once it's connected, you can move it around and make it a little more visually appealing, make sure it's not too confusing for you on that workflow designer, and then you can go in and edit this action as you would any other action, as if you were setting up through the legacy designer. Now, we'll show you we've also released the same structure for our workflows. So if I come over here to NITRO Workflows, we're now going to have the option to create a designer workflow. And one thing you probably noticed before this was even released, if you hit new workflow now, you get this pop-up, which you didn't get before, but now you get this pop-up where you can select your list. And let me just pick, I don't know, let's pick that one. We can do designer, and then you have those options that you're familiar with for when an item is created, modified, or deleted. So we set that up front, and then we hit OK. So whenever an item is created, we're going to do something, and you'll see this pops up. It's going to look just like the custom actions designer, right? So it's very similar interface. We wanted to keep it consistent. We wanted to keep it, familiar to what you've been using already, so that there is that consistency across the tool sets. And so it's not going to be, there's not going to be really a change in how you set this up. So we could do pretty much the same thing we just looked at, where we could do a gateway. We could have that map out to two different like approver query list actions. See, where is the query list? We put a query list over here and have a connector go over to that. And then we could get rid of this connector. Have another one go over to that, etc. So you can kind of see how you can go through this process and build out your workflows in a visual way. So you want some other stuff to happen when this condition is met over here. Well, then you can go and create other branchings, other gateways, other condition sets like that. So you can go through and build out your workflow and have it look nice. So yeah, so it's a great way to visualize your workflow. Now it's there for the NITRO workflows as well as the custom actions. And as we go through 2022, we're going to release a few more things here. So we notice that in the events and controls, we have a create gateway option, and that's essentially our conditions. Like formerly, if in the legacy interface, you had in each of your actions an ability to add a condition. Well, now it comes from the gateway. So a slightly different way of thinking things. You might want to rethink how your workflow is structured. It might look a little different if you do it through the designer versus legacy, just because of those conditions. But that is an option. So you can. So if I go here, create a new action, add list item, You'll see here conditions at the top. That's essentially what the gateway is doing, is just saying, okay, what are my conditions and which way am I going to go? Just kind of a more slick way to do it, a more visual way to see it. So the workshop today is not focused on this. We can have one specifically about the workflow designer. If you want to learn more about it, certainly reach out to us and talk to us about what you have in mind or how you want to use it.
Hey, James.
Yeah.
One quick question from one of our distinguished attendees was, can you download and import the workflow in this new designer the same way you could in the other? It's about importing and exporting the workflow.
Yeah. That's a great question.
I think
Yeah.
what they're saying here is it says import until you save it, then it says export at the top, right? Isn't that what it is?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you're going to have an import option here at the top to import your settings. One caveat to this is that you can't take a legacy workflow and import it to a designer interface. Or at least not as far as I know. I haven't tried it, but because of the way it's structured in the back end and the way the underlying files storing these settings are structured, you can't have a direct mapping from the legacy to the designer. You have to recreate it. But if you have a designer workflow and you want to import and export that to a new space or new area, new site, you develop it on a dev site, you want to move it to a production site, that's going to work fine. That'll work great for legacy. That'll work great for this. It's just not going to be mapping from one to the other. You can't map a designer to a legacy, and you can't map a legacy to a designer. That's going to be true for the custom actions as well. So there's one thing to note, is that there isn't a direct translation option at the moment to move from one to the other. That may be one of the things we talk about on our development roadmap, but it's not there right now. Other things we do have on our roadmap, though, are these do while loops. So we can have another kind of, not a gateway perhaps, but another kind of icon that we'll put in there to show, okay, do these functions while a variable is is under a certain threshold, right? So we'll be able to have those do while loops in here. And actually, one thing I didn't mention in my Sway presentation that is new is this setting of a variable. I think that's actually over in custom actions, not in this one. I may have to yeah, I think I'll have to update the site, but there is actually a new action we just released, I think this week or last week, where you can set a variable value as one of the actions within the workflow. So formerly you could do like a query list and set a variable from a query list result and then use it later on in your processing. And now you can actually have a direct literal value, like the variable is 5. And then every time you run the action, the variable decrements or increments whichever way you want to go. So it could go down to 4, and then it can run that process again and go down to 3. So it's almost like a do while loop, but we're going to have more better support for that coming out in 2022. We're also going to have state management, which I know you've seen in some of these solutions. So we're going to add in some state management as well. So if it's a certain state, you can go over here, a certain state, you can go over there. Kind of an example of that is if you have like an IT ticket that has several possible states, right? It's got assigned, unassigned, resolved, closed, in progress could be one of them. So instead of having multiple gateways with multiple conditions to determine which way it goes, because the condition right now is it's either this or that. It's either meets this value or it doesn't. And that is somewhat limited because then you have to have multiple conditions to get all those different scenarios. Like, what do you do when it's in progress? What do you do when it's approved? What do you do when it's assigned? So instead of having different gateways to handle those processes, we're going to have state management to handle each one of those scenarios. But that's what this structure, well, getting too far into that, and we'll definitely have workshops on that stuff when that comes out, right? So we'll have workshops to kind of walk through all those cool new features that we're going to be releasing. And what allows us to do that is this infrastructure of having the designer interface. So, we're going to have that there for custom actions. We're going to have that there for workflows. So it gives you a much better way to interact with your business processes and see them in a visual way. There is a question about any way to trigger a workflow through an HTTP request.
Well, Invoke Workflows, not just NITRO Workflows. Maybe take an Invoke Workflow and show the different things it can invoke.
Yeah, exactly. So we do have the option to invoke other workflows through the through this process here. There's an invoke, there's an invoke Azure function. So you could go invoke a function over in Azure that you've developed. You can invoke a web service, which is an option for REST API service that you might have out there that you can call and reference in the invoke web service action. And then you can also go and invoke a workflow, which it can be NITRO workflow. It can be a Power Automate flow if you're in the Office 365 world, or it could be a standard SharePoint flow. So standard SharePoint flow would be, listed here. Any Crow Canyon NITRO workflow that's user triggered would be listed here. Then of course Power Automate, if you have the URL and the data that you want to pass over to that Power Automate, all that information is there as well. So this is there within custom actions. This is there within NITRO workflows. So yes, to answer that question, you can call other workflows from your current workflow. And we do that a lot actually to help with business processes and cascading to different functions. Especially sometimes you have a custom action, you want to have someone press a button, but the function is to manage permissions, which you do at the workflow level. So that's one way to do that, is you invoke a workflow from the custom action that actually manages those permissions for you. So again, it can be, we're not limiting it to just NITRO workflows. As you see here, you can do SharePoint, regular SharePoint Visual Studio workflows, or Power Automate flows as well. All possible. Yeah, so we're going to be investing some resources into this over the coming year as well. So you'll see some enhancements, improvements, like I mentioned, the state management, do while loops, for loops, those kinds of things. We're going to be adding those functions into this workflow designer, so it can make it even more powerful than it is right now.
Did you mention about the debugging too? I might have missed that.
No, I didn't mention it. I did not mention about the debugging, but that is a cool feature. That's part of this, is you can go through and well, it's not going to allow me to do it because I have all these unconfigured actions that I plopped on here. I can just delete some of those. Let me delete that, delete that, delete that. But yeah, when you debug, you can go and debug, and in the custom action, you can just decide which item you want to debug on, and it'll go through the process and show you all those things. But yeah, that's been there. We're going to add more, probably a little more, make it a little more verbose, I guess you could say, or where you can get more information about what's going on. But I think it's pretty, it gives you quite a lot of information if you just kind of read through. It's pretty logical what's being pulled up in here. So it is, it is pretty awesome tool for the debugging. All right. Okay, so that's the workflow and custom actions designer. Again, I'm happy to go into that in more detail. I could do a whole another workshop on those, but really want to focus in today on these other new features that we put out there. So I make sure we talk about all those. That is probably one of the coolest ones, the coolest one, but we've got a few other things here we can talk about. So parsing CSV actions, this parse CSV action. So basically what you do is you take a CSV file, upload it into the system, and it'll take that data that's on the CSV file and map it into SharePoint columns. So you can do that from a custom action, or you can do that from a workflow, and you can do it in a couple different scenarios. So if it's sent in via email as an attachment to an item, you could parse it as part of a workflow. So the workflow will recognize it, and you can see on here, I'll just make it a little bigger. Where do you get the CSV data from? Well, if it's an attachment to an email that you send in that creates a SharePoint item, well, there you go. Then you can just process the CSV file that's attached to that email. If you have a NITRO attachments column, you could identify which column is specified for the CSV files, and then you can have your user, when they upload them into the file. So yeah, you have a new, for instance, you have a new form, which has an attachments column and says input, upload CSV file, whatever the type of file is, upload that, this CSV file for contacts, for assets, for whatever it is. So the new form has that attachments column. You upload your CSV file, and the NITRO workflow is configured to kick off when that item is added, or it could be kicked off when that attachment field is changed to include the CSV file, and then it'll go through and parse it. So in this scenario here, what we have is, say it's a list of assets. We load it into the system. We're going to target the list of assets in our tool, in our SharePoint site, and we're going to map from the CSV file, which you'll get that CSV file title from here. You'll just have to go on your file and actually, pull that title row and whatever the value is for each column, put it in here and map it to a corresponding SharePoint column. And that's going to allow you to bring the information from the CSV file into your SharePoint list. So to do that, it's going to create items in your SharePoint list. So again, you can do that by presenting a screen through a custom action where they pop it into that, and then it processes that CSV file. Or we could do it as a part of processing attachment that comes into the system and possibly via email. So a few different options for that CSV file coming into the system and how that would work. So that's a pretty cool feature. Like I said, if you're using our Excel to SharePoint import tool, it is a way to get around some of the issues with authentication. So it's already, because you're running as an authenticated user as part of the custom action, or even as the workflow, you don't have to worry about multi-factor authentication, and all that stuff. So works really well. So the other cool feature we added in here is this whole concept of SMS texting. So we know this is used by some organizations, especially if you have field staff. Let's say you're in a facilities scenario, you have break fix work orders that come into the system, and you want to alert your people out in the field, your technicians, that hey, you're out in the field, you need to go look at this issue over here. So, or it could be an approval. The CEO is hanging out on the beach in Aruba, and they need to make an approval, right? And so they can just get the text on their phone and hit approve, click the link and then approve it, and they're good to go. And they don't have to know that you're on the beach on the other side of Aruba, also. So you can do all that through texting, and it's going to connect back into SharePoint, obviously, but it's going pretty much the processing can be handled through the texting interface. So you can, as you can see here, we can send it from the Twilio account. So that's going to be your specific Twilio account phone number that you set up. It's a fairly reasonably priced service. I forget what the numbers are off the top of my head, but something like less than a cent per text message or something like that. It's really pretty reasonable. So you're not going to, unless you're using this like really heavily, you're not going to incur any huge costs with that Twilio account. But you define who it goes to, so that could be to a particular individual as long as their mobile number is part of their profile. Or you can directly specify a field on the form. Maybe you fill out the person's phone number on the form, and that's going to be who it goes to. And you can see you can get that phone number from the user profile or from Active Directory, depending on where it might be located. And then you can configure what goes into that body, right? So it could be you could embed a link in there, which is going to be a link back over to an item that they might need to approve, or maybe it's just a notification to say, hey, there's something in the system you need to go look at. You just really want to get that notification out to them in the quickest way possible. Or it's in addition to other ways, right? You email them, you send them a text. You can even use a NITRO bot and send them that message as well. So there's a few, gives you another way of that to communicate out to your users, out to the people who need to be notified that something needs to happen. This is going to be there for on-prem and Office 365. So as long, I think, is that right? Is there for, anyway, it should be there. I believe it is there for both. On-prem, as long as you have that Twilio account, that Twilio connection.
Yes.
Yeah. As long as you have that Twilio account, I think you can connect up to it from on-prem or Office 365. Of course, that depends on your on-prem being accessible to the internet to connect to Twilio.
It's like email. It's like sending email. Everybody sends email out from on-premises. Same idea.
Yeah, sure. Good point. It's very, very similar to email in that sense. Yeah, so you have that option there. And then the converse option is that if you want to set up the email or SMS text to SharePoint list item sync, you can do that. So we can, you can see here, just to read through this, you configure notifications to one or more devices. There's support for creating items via text. Like I just said, you can bring an item from an email mailbox, or you can monitor this phone number essentially and bring items in from the text that hit that phone number. So a couple different ways you can get into it. Like I said, it does require a Twilio account, but like I said, that's a fairly minimal cost overall. So we did have a workshop on that. We're going to a lot of that stuff in more detail. Then another thing we worked on was UI improvements for the buttons on Nitro Forms. It's really more of a usability or user experience sort of thing rather than a functional thing, but it does make it a lot nicer for people to use a modern looking system. So right here, I put in our the classic standard SharePoint buttons, which are pretty pedestrian. I mean, really nothing much going on, but they get the job done. They're functional, they work fine. But if you want to add some pizzazz to it, add a little gradient, add a little color, add a little background, even change the font. You can make it italicized, big and bold, so increase the font and made it much larger with an orange gradient background on here. All that's very, very easy to do with the Nitro form. Again, I did a whole workshop on all this stuff on this Nitro button improvement, so you can go take a look at that if you want to learn more detail, or certainly feel free to pop a question in or ask us directly if you ever want to learn more about this. But definitely some options there for the buttons. And it's not just going to be the save and cancel buttons on the standard SharePoint form, because we also have on our forms custom action buttons. We have the Nitro I was going to say the custom actions buttons. We have the UI, the Nitro associated items column buttons. All that is now editable, and you can make it look kind of different. So you can do that through the theme. If we go over to our theme, let's go ahead and copy this one and just show you really how easy it is. It's super simple. I'm just going to call it new theme, just kind of same as the other. And then generating gradients, really easy. You just hit that gradient generator, you come out to the site here, pick whichever one you want. And all you have to do is copy, hit the little copy button down here, go back to your form, pop it in. You want something different on hover, you could go ahead and get a new gradient on hover. Let's say I want to make it blue just to give you that differentiation. Copy, pop it in there. Then you have the font where you can choose the font size, italic, where I made it, I made that italic hover font color. I can make that black. Font color I can make black, keep that consistent. So you do all that, hit save, and choose that new theme. And just like that, you've changed your buttons. Real easy. Go back in here, change the radius, go back to buttons, border radius. This is what gives it that rounding appeal, rounding look. Hit save. There you go. Now you got some rounding on there. You can make that a little more rounded, less rounded, depending on what you want to do. But that's going to apply to these buttons here. They'll apply to any of these action buttons that you drag and drop onto your form as well. You can see this is going to look like the same, right? So it's got the same hover over color. It's got that, it's got that gradient, the orange to the blue gradient that I put on there. So, but you also have, and maybe this is something we didn't talk about too much in the workshop, and I'll mention it here, is you can override that button style. So let's say you want to have a submit button and a script button on the same form. You can put both of those on there. But when you want one to look a little different, well, that's okay. You hit edit over here on the override button style, and now you can create a different gradient for that other button. So we'll hit copy on that, come back over here, and let's keep it like that. And I think I have to apply. It's probably not going to work because it wants me to put a function in there. And let's put a dummy function in there, call back. There we go. Just to make it work. See, there you go. Now you got a different style, and see, it didn't honor the radius because I removed that radius, right? I mean, so it's going to go back to normal. So you'd have to set that up, but you can override the styles and have different colored buttons for different functions on the same form. So they don't all have to be the same. And the associated items buttons can have similar options. So if you go and create a associated items column, no, it's an attachments column. Let me do the associated items column. There it is. You'll see that you have the styles tab, and that's going to allow you to do this. Basically the same thing we just did. You can change those button stylings. So I thought that was pretty cool. Nice little UX feature for you guys to play around with, maybe make it a little more appealing for users, or maybe direct their attention to a certain part of the form that they might not have been able to really, or might have glossed over, or whatever the case might be. The other thing that you can do is you can change the text for the associated items new button, right? So if we come back over here, we have our, let's see, what's it say? New items. So right, we have this box here now where you can say something different. So if you wanted to create it as a new item, you can put that in there. But if you have a different text you want to put in there, you can certainly do that. All right, and then let's see. Okay, so we got a question. What version for the workflow designer? Okay, so the workflow designer is not in that version you have, the 2.0.0.5. That's going to be in a later version. And and basically I went through this version log that we have on our support website to get all kind of glean what was changed. So let's see, it was crowcanyon.com. And version log.
Version 25 or something, aren't we?
Yeah,
24 or 25. I think we're on 25 even.
I think we released 25. We just haven't gotten the site updated yet. But let's see, workflow designer. Let's see, yeah. So I'd have to go back through and see which one it was released under. But I know it was after that. So it was a little bit later version. I think we released up to 2.0.19 on primary now, so I believe it's there. But yeah, well, I'll have to double check that which one it actually came out on, but it's going to be later, a little bit later. Okay, great. Okay, let's see what else we got here. ID column. Okay, this one's kind of a neat little function that you can create an ID, custom ID pattern for your SharePoint items. And like I said at the beginning, it's not going to replace the SharePoint ID itself. That's basically irreplaceable. That is the SharePoint database column. It cannot be changed, cannot be modified, which is fine, which is great. Actually, is very usable because you can take that ID column that SharePoint gives you and modify it in a way to give your items a specific pattern to that ID. So like I say here, you can use all these different kinds of formats. You can set it to a specific length so that you always have some leading zeros or some leading characters ahead of that ID number. You can use that SharePoint ID as a value as a placeholder, or you could do something completely different where you have different different columns within your form that you want to use to inform what that column value should be. So it can be doesn't have to be just an ID. It could be other functions as well. Like I said, you could have purchase request 2021 December 15, right? So you can use that, build that function in the ID column to get the month and the day and the year of whenever that purchase request was submitted, and that's going to give you your consistent pattern for an ID. So and then you can use that as your kind of unique value. It may not be unique. You probably want to make sure it's going to be unique, but that's kind of up to you how you want to do that. But yeah, so that's the ID column. We'll just take a quick peek at it. And let's see. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll hammer on improver task. I keep hammering on that one, so I'll just stick with it. New setting, just kind of quickly go through the settings you have on here. You could use create a brand new column. If you want to use an existing single line text column, you could do that. But either way is up to you. I'll do like ID column. And we can apply it when the item's created. We can apply it when the item is updated, or vice versa, or just when it's updated instead of created. Of course, if you're using the ID as a placeholder, you want to make sure it's done after creation. So you want to do after save, right? So you want to do, if you're going to use the ID number is not going to exist until after the item is created. So you want to make sure you choose that if you're going to use ID in your pattern. So that's one thing to note. But if you do it before save and you have other values in there, you want to kind of build up your pattern. You could do something like this, assigned to, and then, created date. And then you can even use one of these functions over here. We have functions at the bottom here for day of the year. Let's see, where is it? Day, month, year. Okay, so let's say we want to get the month. So we can do month, and we can take that created value and pop that in there. So we take that out. So that's going to give you the month of when it was created. So for instance, December. So it's going to be the assigned to dash month. Maybe assigned to doesn't make sense. I'm just kind of making this up as I go here. So, and have a specific one here. You can do task status if you want to change that ID every time the status gets updated. That's another option. So you can do like in progress and then the ID number as your placeholder up there. So your task status changes, or you do it ID. This actually might be kind of a cool one. Do ID and then task status. So then you can see immediately, okay, is it in progress? Is it completed? Where is it in process? So if you do that, you apply that same pattern. I can just copy and paste that, and just cut and paste actually. So let's say you want to cut and paste. You don't do it only do it when the item is updated, or I guess you could do it when item's created too. Do it like that. So something like that. After save, this is the value, and then after save, every time it'll update that. So it'll actually update that value as you go and make adjustments to it. So it's not set in stone. It doesn't have to be set in stone. So you could set it in stone by unchecking this option, only apply an item create, but you could also make it dynamic and have things updated as you go through. So it's kind of a neat little feature they have in there to do it. You can even create different patterns for different conditions. So if you have different types of tickets or different types of items getting created in your SharePoint list, you can have a indicator over here. It's X kind of ticket, so do this pattern. Then you have a different pattern for Y kind of ticket. Do like request ID versus incident, etc. So these would be two different patterns in two different settings, and for each list, you can definitely have multiple. You can have multiple settings for this. So you can have 5 or 6 different types of tickets, all have different indicators. So it kind of gives you a way to separate out your SharePoint items in the same list. That's kind of a cool little feature they can use. Go away, Edge. I don't want to save that. All right. So again, I did a webinar workshop on this, so you can learn more about it. We have some information in our manual. If you want to learn more, certainly let me know. We can set up some time to talk about that. So then we also worked on a few other things over the year, just a few, help improve the functionality of the tool. Maybe not highlight worthy like the custom actions designer, but it does give you some functionality in the tool. Like one of the big things we did was, we had this query limit just for performance issues of 50, right? You can only pull back 50 items from a query list, but we've increased that by, as per customer demand, we increased that to 100. So you can now pull back 100 items in a query instead of just 50. All right, so we did that. We also added some new functions in our workflows and custom actions. It's you now have a ability to use the divide function. So that's obviously a arithmetic function to do a division. We can get AD user properties. That's a new function. You can add and subtract. So we kind of added those things. We had product already, which was a multiplication function, but we added divide, add, and subtract to kind of complete out the arithmetic functions. We also have this computer date time function, which if you look in our version log, I think it has a little more in there. Whoops. All right. Sorry. Can't type right now. So we have a little more information on that compute date time, not computer, compute date time. I think it's just going to get some get date value for a given time zone and format. So if you have a different time zone that you want to pull some information from, that's different, because otherwise SharePoint and NITRO operate based on whatever your regional settings time zone is, right? But if you have a group in a different time zone, or if you want to calculate a time for a different time zone or a different type of ticket, for instance, we do work across the world, the United States and the world. And let's say we wanted to put in a date time that was based on the Australia time zone instead of the Pacific time zone. We could do that through a compute date time function. So it just gives you a way to have a different way to monitor it. So kind of cool new feature there. And then parse state value, that's another one released. I think that's also in our version log, parse state value. To parse the input date and set per required time. So again, time zone related function to have you kind of differentiate a ticket for one time zone versus tickets for other tickets or items that might be in the same time zone as the regional site settings. So a few options there. Let's see, custom action improvements. So specifically to custom actions, we added in this ability to show the preview of a document from the generate document action. So last year we released this generate document action where it can take a template such as a Word document or an Excel document or in a NITRO print template and generate a document from that information. So it can take dynamic values from your SharePoint list item, map them into that template, map them into that Word template, and create a create a document out of it. But we didn't give you a way to see it until this year. Earlier this year, we did release that where you can see it as part of that custom action. It'll pop open that preview of what it's going to look like, and you can make sure it's got things in the right place. You're not missing information. Instead of having to go and open that document after you create it, now you can decide at the moment, do I want to continue with creating the document? Yes, no. And then you can cancel it if it doesn't look right and you go make adjustments. Then we also, kind of similar vein, we gave you giving you an option now in the custom action tool to use that document that was just generated in a send mail action. So if you create the document and then you want to send an email, previously you'd have to go, okay, generate the document and then go to wherever the document was stored, pull it up, attach it to an email and send it out. But now we're giving you an option to generate that document, refer back to that generate document action in a send mail action, and in the very next breath, basically, you can send it off, right? So you create the document, look at it, looks great, fine, hit OK, next action sends it off. So it gives you a way to kind of review it, make sure it looks good, and then you can send it off to whoever needs to see it. And it'll send it as, there's settings to send as PDF or send it as a Word document, however whatever type of document you create from that generate document process, that's what's going to get attached and sent in the send mail action. All right, and so a few other NITRO workflow improvements. So we've been working behind the scenes, not something we're putting out in our version log or is really readily available, but we have been making a lot of behind the scenes work to make workflows have better availability, have and increase resources for better performance. So as our customer base has grown, we've had some growing pains in that area, but we're working hard to provide the support and resources for making sure our workflows function consistently and are there when you need them to be. So we've been doing a lot of work on the behind the scenes for that side of things. We added this generate document action to NITRO Workflows. It was already there for custom actions, but we added it to workflows. We added the move item action to workflows for on-premises customers. Previously, this was only available for Office 365 customers, but this year we moved the move item action to workflows for on-prem. And then we added support for expressions and mail templates, like using a variable value. So you can take a variable, input some information into it. Previously, you could only reference maybe information about the user, maybe information about the site, other than the actual literal values that are there in the SharePoint list item columns. Now we can actually take information maybe from a query list, get it into our current workflow, and put it into a variable, and then we can use that variable in our mail template. So it gives you a little more options for what you send out in the notifications that go from NITRO Workflows. And then a few other improvements we made to a few other tools over the year. I mean, I'll be honest, most of our time and effort was spent in that workflow designer and the custom actions designer. Another big thing we released, before I get into the list on the screen here, another big thing we released was the ability for dedicated Azure. So now we have our NITRO Studio available for dedicated Azure. And what that means is, you can, if you have a data sovereignty requirements, or if you're in GCC High, there's a way for you to use NITRO now where you're not, relying on a common Azure interface. It's going to be a completely Azure environment completely owned by you, that you can that you control and oversee, other than of course Microsoft owns it, but but still kind of within your environment, especially for GCC high customers that can't use commercial Azure. That was another one of our big efforts this year. So we're hoping to have a little more, and I say that because first of all, to announce that that's what we have available, but also to say there usually would be more in a list like this with email sync, print manager, these types of things. But those efforts took up a lot of our time, and we're going to be kind of refocusing on these things in 2022, where it can just continue to improve email sync, print manager, options available in tiles and dials, things like that, and especially the NITRO bot, the whole NITRO bot world. We sort of have, it's working great. We kind of said it, but there's more we can do with it, and we're going to do more with that over 2022 as well. But for things we did release, we now have the ability in email sync to release to parse the email header, which gives us more information about where the email is coming from, who sent it, and it gives us more options for processing that information. And then you could use it to determine what to do with that email. Do you actually convert it into a SharePoint list item or not? It depends where it might come from, and which might only be accessible by understanding what's in that email header. In the print manager tool, now we have the option for including custom actions. And so, for example, some of those generate document and send mail actions we talked about a little bit earlier, those are now available in your print tool. So you could go hit the print button, see it, and then if you want to send it off as an email, you could do that. You could generate a document from that and store it on your OneDrive. You can do it from the print manager tool. So it kind of extends what you can do with print manager a little bit. So you can kind of do it from the print manager interface, or you could do it from the custom actions interface. It gives you another way to manage when and where you see documents that get created and how they get created. So it gives you more flexibility in that. We also added in tiles and dials, you got the option to use a query instead of a list view. So up until this year, you could only use the list views that you've created to filter the items that get returned in that tiles and dials interface. But now you can go and build a query, and instead of building a whole list view and on the fly, you can have that query determine what's shown in that tile or that dial. And then for the NITRO bot, we're going to be adding, like I said, we're going to be focusing a lot more on that over 2022. But we did add the ability to invoke the NITRO bot from within a channel. So if you were using the NITRO bot, you could previously really only interact with it as its own entity, as its own chat, persona, I guess you could say. But now you still kind of do that, but still now you can do it within a channel instead of directly just communicating with the bot, which gives you a way to have more users interacting with that bot and seeing what the responses are. So if you have a team that wants to look up all the open tickets for a particular individual, well, you can query the bot, have that pull up in your IT team's channel and see that information. So you don't have to get it and then send it to everyone. It's going to be right there in the team's channel for everyone to see. So yeah, so that kind of outlines the improvements that we've done over the course of the year. I don't know if there's any more that I missed. I'm sure there's a lot. I mean, we put a lot out there, and I kind of gleaned the best of the best that I thought would fit into this 1-hour webinar. But if there's anything you want to ask more about that we didn't talk about on today's workshop, certainly reach out, pop a question in the chat channel or the questions channel. Either way, however you want to get in touch with us, let us know. But I do want to point out a couple things before we go here. The NITRO training options. So we do have, if you want to learn more about what we've released, or if you want to get a refresher training course, we have a couple options. For those who have never taken NITRO training, we have a course for NITRO training, $29.95, up to 12 hours of training and some mentoring that will learn all the features of NITRO, including what we talked about today, and then some. We're going to talk about, we can also look at a NITRO refresher training course, which is basically just hey, you've got the basics, you've got the, you just need a reminder on this trick or that tip, or just kind of a review of things we released. We'll go into that designer in more detail. We'll talk about some of those actions we just released. So that refresher training course might be good if you've already taken NITRO training, or if you spend a lot of time with it already and you just need a little bit of refresher. We have that course available. And then one thing we haven't really advertised all that much, but I want to put it out there for people to see, is this advanced NITRO training course for administrators, which is kind of geared towards the on-prem world, because the Office 365 world kind of takes care of itself. But for the on-prem world, there might be certain things you want to do from a server level that you want to understand that we haven't really explicitly defined in our NITRO training course. I know we've had a few customers take it and really loved it and got a lot out of it. So especially for the on-prem customers, if you want to learn more about how to administer NITRO from that level, from the server side level, then we have that course available. It's 4 hours. We'll talk about some of the more advanced features of NITRO that general users wouldn't need to see or be a part of. It really just, how do I administer it? How do I make it? How do I diagnose? How do you get the log files? How do you things like that? So I've been idle too long. I've been going through, what do you mean I'm idle too long? I've been going through this whole time. What the heck's going on? Oh, Microsoft, gotta love them. Anyway, so that's it. That's my sway. I like using sway, actually. This is pretty cool. But yeah, so if you have anything else you want to ask or anything else you want to take a look at, certainly let us know, or any suggestions.
Well, you
yeah.
did bring the forum into play this year, and that's been getting some activity, including a feature request section, right?
Yeah, I was just about to mention that. Yeah, we
yeah,
we have this Code Canyon. We call it feature suggestions, but I think a better name for it is Code Canyon user voice. I know Microsoft has that user voice, so we kind of keying off of that. And I know some folks have used this quite a lot, but want to kind of bring it to your attention if you haven't seen it already. We have this forum, not just the user voice piece of it, but we also have all these other arenas for asking questions and get answers from fellow users of SharePoint, of NITRO, and also for our support team will get back to you as well if the community isn't answering the question. So you have those options available. The forum is great. If you haven't signed up for it already, you can go ahead and pop in there and take a look at it. And just real quick on upcoming events, we have a couple webinars for this asset journey, which is an AM asset management plan tool built for retirement village operators in Australia. And that was what that one was for. We also have Power Ups versus NITRO Studio, another workshop coming up, because we do get that question a lot about how is it different, what are the differences, what are the comparisons, that kind of stuff. The workflow visual designer, I mentioned it on today's call, but we'll go into it in more detail on January 12th, just kind of an over, well, I guess it's more of a high level overview to announce to the general populace that we have it, because this will be a webinar. And then the bots, we're going to be talking about bots. Like I said, we're going to be focusing in on bots over the next year as well. Another one of our focus areas. Another area we want to focus on is this knowledge base. So if you have an IT help desk, one of our IT help desk tools, you probably have the knowledge base. But I've seen a lot of our customers don't use it as much or as fully as they could. And I think that's probably from just not having the knowledge on how to do it. And so that's what we're going to focus in on this workshop in the end of January. We're going to talk about those kinds of things.
Right. And I'll tie right in with the bots, because the bots, to be answering questions, need to have some knowledge base behind it. And bots don't have to be just answering questions. They can perform functions like fill out a form or show me my list of tickets or do an approval. But one aspect of bots is also utilizing a knowledge base. So that kind of ties in with that, with bots, and kind of overlaps, I should say, with bots, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It really does. But yeah, great. So I think that's just about it. If there's any follow-up or anything else you want to learn about, certainly let us know. Any suggestions on topics for these workshops, we're happy to field those comments and feedback as well. You guys that have been coming to a lot of these webinars, we really appreciate it over the last couple of years or so. So we hope you keep coming. And but yeah, this is for you guys. If you have any topics you want us to cover that we haven't, or you want to learn more about, certainly shoot us a note and let us know. And we'll get it on the schedule. Yeah, I appreciate everyone coming out today. We're just about near the top of the hour, so we'll end it there. But I hope everyone has a great holiday season. Happy New Year. Won't be having another one of these until January, so that's gives a little bit of break, but gives myself a little break too. But yeah, I hope a lot to come in 2022, and we're really looking forward to you guys continuing your journey with us with Nitro. So we appreciate it. So
Okay,
thanks
thanks.
everyone. Have a
Thanks,
great end
Gene.
of year. You're welcome. All right, take care. Bye bye.